Welcome to the UCC's first ever denomination-wide Earth Day Summit. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ, and I'll be sharing the MC responsibilities today with the Reverend Michael Malcolm. Michael, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Brooks. I'm the Reverend Michael Malcolm, the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. I also represent the Southeast Conference on the UCC's Council for Climate Justice.
Michael, one of the things I love most about this event is that it embodies the different settings of the UCC, local, conference, and national. In spearheading the creation of this event, the UCC's Council for Climate Justice was intentional about this. The plan is to have a different conference and local church join as co-host each year. We especially want to invite a local church that has long exemplified its commitments to the environment and its ministries. For this reason, we asked Mayflower United Church of Christ in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to be one of our co-hosts this year. Indeed, some of our speakers and some of our audience will be joining us live from Mayflower. We will learn more about Mayflower later on through an inspiring video. Another co-host today is the Minnesota Conference, which has additionally been an environmental leader in our denomination through General Synod resolutions and more. The national setting of the UCC is also a co-host, and we will begin with words of welcome from our General Minister and President, the Reverend Dr. John Dorhauer. Dorhauer is traveling in the Middle East today, so he recorded this message for us.
Hello, friends. It's John Dorhauer, General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. And I just want to take a minute and bring some greetings as we gather to celebrate Earth Day in 2023. This is a time when we all have deep concerns about the health of this planet that we love. I was just reading this morning as I was traveling through a couple of airports about the massive flooding in southern Florida and parts of the state and cities in the state that are underwater. We all know the dire predictions about the future if we don't transform our ways, our habits, our behaviors. It's our season to walk humbly and softly and carefully upon this earth that we love. And it inspires me that so many will gather on a day like this to commit ourselves and recommit ourselves and remind ourselves of the good work that is yet to be done. I pray that our time together and that your time together will inspire us, will bring to light new strategies, innovative thinking, and hopeful designs on what the future can look like when we see with love our responsibility as stewards to take care of the beauty that is before us. So let's enjoy ourselves. Let's inspire ourselves. Let's remind ourselves that there's reason to hope and reason to believe and certainly reason to act. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for the work that you've done, the commitments you've made. And thank you for all that you will do, having gathered here today to go out and love the earth and all who inhabit it. Thank you.
We will now hear from the Conference Minister of Minnesota, the Reverend Sherry Preston.
Good morning, United Church of Christ. The psalmist reminds us that the earth is God's and the fullness thereof. And today we gather from across the United Church of Christ to be reminded that we are called to be faithful stewards of God's precious gift of this earth. I'm delighted to bring you greetings from the Minnesota Conference United Church of Christ, a co-sponsor of this first Earth Day Summit in the UCC. We are a place of beautiful and over 10,000 lakes and trails everywhere you look, and we are a conference that fully divested from fossil fuels in 2015. We are delighted to be. We're delighted to gather with you today and to welcome you to the sacred event where we can recommit to being the stewards God calls us to be. Have a great day.
Thank you, Sherry. The lead minister for Mayflower UCC is the Reverend Sarah Campbell, who will offer our final words of welcome.
Welcome to Mayflower UCC, a church of about 700 members in South Minneapolis, 2 miles from George Floyd Square, and just 2 years shy of our 100-year anniversary. We are honored to host this first National UCC Earth Day. A little bit more about us. We started our annual Earth Day worship in 1990. Music is big at Mayflower Church, and we've commissioned earth anthems through the years, and Mayflower member Marty Haugen has written us numerous earth hymns. Be careful with your music, it can move you into powerful places. Faith formation is also big at Mayflower, our school of heart for all ages. We've been educating ourselves about the earth for decades, and we are an organizing church, an activist church. We don't simply educate our members for their own private civic engagement. Rather, we act collectively and strategically on timely actions in partnership with our excellent faith-based organizations in Minnesota. Faith-based organizing, think Alinsky, think Obama, think excellent organizers, creating strategies and turning out our members together for actions along with other congregations, mosques, synagogues, temples, thereby leveraging more power for change. We are not just faithful Christians. We also aim to be powerful Christians, working for God's dream of justice and earth justice. Because of 10 years of hard work with other congregations, the Minnesota legislature recently passed a 100% clean energy by 2040 bill. Because we showed up in solidarity with Anishinaabe water protectors and other congregations to stop line 3 north of here, we didn't stop the line. But we did continue the growing, powerful movement against fossil fuel development. Companies are increasingly alarmed by this growing activism. Mayflower was at the heart of the divestment movement in the UCC. Near the beginning, we divested also all of our foundation funds from fossil fuels. And this year, we have another resolution that will be at the heart of the General Synod. It's all about electrification. That's some of who we are, but mostly today, we are excited to learn about all the many UCC congregations across this country doing rigorous faith-based organizing for the earth. We are not alone. We have so many comrades all across the country, churches not afraid of power and of victories in the halls of government and corporate boardrooms. We all know that education is not enough. Indeed, too much climate news can lead to paralysis. Let's put more of our energy into organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was extremely powerful, and you all are doing some tremendous work. So our schedule for today is to begin with recognitions and awards. We will then hear from our esteemed keynote speaker of the day, the Reverend Jim Antal, and engage in Q&A before we take a 15-minute break. After which, we will resume with a presentation about the environmental ministries of Mayflower UCC, which will be followed by a panel of 3 organizers for justice who have stories of hope to share. After Q&A with them, we will wrap up this summit in the best possible way to end an Earth Day Summit with a call to action.
As we begin with recognitions, I want to share one of my favorite images, the UCC Creation Justice Family Tree. In the UCC, we realize how essential and vital every ministry is. While notable accomplishments are to be joyfully celebrated with fanfare, we know that everyone is needed and significant contributions to the environmental justice movement are being made in churches and conferences across the country. This family tree represents as much of that as we can squeeze into a single image. There are green teams and individuals all over to be celebrated and lifted up. There are conference committees and ministries to be celebrated and lifted up. Our great power and potential comes from each and every part of our family tree. Each of you in this audience deserves some recognition. This past year, we have seen the fruits of countless ministries. In 2022 and 2023, we have had congregations go through an intentional process of discernment for how to best live out our first calling as Christians, caring for God's creation. All of these congregations brought their unique gifts to the process of becoming creation justice churches. Our newest creation justice churches include Colonial Park, UCC in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Congregational Church of Middlebury, UCC in Middlebury, Vermont, Congregational UCC in Punta Gorda, Florida, Coral Gables Congregational UCC in Coral Gables, Florida, First Congregational UCC in Boulder, Colorado, First Congregational UCC in Eugene, Oregon, First Congregational Church of Montclair in Montclair, New Jersey, Hope UCC in St. Louis, Missouri, Magnolia UCC in Seattle, Washington, UCC Longmont in Longmont, Colorado, and University Congregational UCC in Seattle, Washington. This past year was also an exciting year because it marked the piloting of a new program spearheaded by the Council for Climate Justice, a grant program for UCC churches, camps, and other entities to have climate justice fellows. Even when the money for grants ran out, we had churches that stepped forward and said, we are still going to make this program happen here, and they did. The youth and young adults who participated in this program were amazing. They brought energy and enthusiasm, knowledge, and gifts of ministry to their respective settings. I now lift up the names of all of our fellows from this past year. Robeson Amory from Union Congregational Church in Montclair, New Jersey. Toria Say from Christ the Healer UCC in Oregon City, Oregon. Jay Cook from First Congregational Church in Montclair, New Jersey. Simona Graceffo from First Congregational Church in Montclair, New Jersey. Lydia Hansberry at the Horton Center in New Hampshire. Sierra Knuckles from Frieden's UCC, Indianapolis, Indiana. Addie Stever from Hazlet Community Church in Edgewood, UCC in East Lansing, Michigan. Anna Shea from Congregational Church, Mercer Island, Washington. We are excited to keep this program running. We will have 12 fellows based in different UCC settings this summer. This is all made possible thanks to the generosity of UCC members who responded to last year's Giving Tuesday appeal from the UCC. This year's donations will also go to support this work. As I like to say, it is never too early or too late to donate for Giving Tuesday. Give today and make a plan to organize members of your church to give in November when Giving Tuesday occurs. Also, make a plan to apply for a Climate Justice Fellowship grant next year so you can have a fellow energizing your church for justice. Michael, I turn it back to you now so that you can tell us about some hot spots for organizing for justice.
That's right, Brooks. This next part of our program has me pumped up. What this world desperately needs right now is more prophetic ministry. This is a call to ministry that centers justice, that's willing to go public, and that's willing to confront those in power. For the first time ever, I'm going to say that again. For the first time ever, Brooks, they say 3 times is a charm, so I'll say it one more time just for goodness sake. For the first time ever, we will be celebrating those engaged in such ministry with the Dollie Burwell Prophetic Action Award. I love that this award is named after the mother of the environmental justice movement. One of the greatest prophetic leaders of our denomination has ever witnessed. We are honored that she recorded a message for us to share with you right now.
My warmest greetings to all of you attending the United Church of Christ First Earth Day Summit. Words just cannot adequately express how delightful I am to have an annual Prophetic Action Award named in my honor. When we began organizing to protect our children from toxic waste dumping in Warren County, North Carolina, 40 plus years ago, we had no idea that we were giving birth to a movement that would continue to have such far-reaching and long-lasting effects. As we protested and waged what I call a very tough and powerful fight against environmental racism, as we put our bodies on the line and spent time in jail, the United Church of Christ was truly my spiritual anchor as well as my faith home. And you know, it makes me just so proud to see our churches continuing the sacred struggle for environmental justice. This is a struggle rooted in love. It's rooted in the very heart of our God. It's a struggle needed now just as much as ever. So today I am just so happy to join you in celebrating our finalists and this year's winner. So may their efforts be an inspiration to others, and may God continue to bless each of them and the United Church of Christ. And may God bless the United States of America.
We have 3 finalists for the award this year: Coral Gables Congregational UCC, First Congregational Church of Montclair, and the Great Lakes Creation Care Collaborative. Our winner will receive $1,000, while our 2 runners-up will each receive $500. Michael, tell us about our first runner-up.
Brooks, our first runner-up is the Great Lakes Creation Care Collaborative. Like Jesus, they flipped some tables and spoke truth to power this past year. Twice they organized actions and liturgies outside banks as they called for divestment from fossil fuels from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America Merrill, Citibank, and Wells Fargo. Congratulations to the Great Lakes Creation Care Collaborative.
Our second runner-up is First Congregational Church of Montclair, New Jersey. They protested pending coal plants at their state capitol and also took action for bank divestment by gathering with others to protest outside their local Chase Bank. Way to go, First Congregational Church of Montclair.
Now, for the winner of the first ever Dollie Burwell Prophetic Action Award. Successful organizes and mobilizes a community for action, gains the attention of the broader public, and compels those in positions of power to act justly. Coral Gables UCC did just that. In a part of the country where extreme heat can lead to death and where suffering reflects the inequities of race and class, more than 80 members of their church organized to show up to call upon public officials to implement a plan to increase the local tree canopy by 30%. The event appeared on local television stations and led to the desired commitment from the public officials. As one would expect from a UCC church, They accomplished this as part of a larger organized effort, but their singular contributions stand out as a remarkable example of prophetic action today. Let's all congratulate Coral Gables, UCC.
Way to go, Coral Gables UCC. Thank you so much for your ministry of prophetic justice. I now have the honor of introducing one of the people I look up to the most, the Reverend Jim Antal. In the UCC, Jim has been our foremost public leader on climate issues for a number of years. Jim has been preaching and leading on climate change since 1988. He has been rabble-rousing with the likes of Bill McKibben and Julian Bond and others for decades. In 2011, he was arrested in front of the White House to protest the Keystone XL pipeline. In 2013, he authored a denominational resolution that led the UCC to be the first denomination to call for fossil fuel divestment. He later authored our resolutions in support of the Paris Climate Agreement and the Green New Deal. In 2018, he authored the book Climate Change, Climate World, the book praised by Desmond Tutu and others. Jim's accomplishments are many and they continue to grow. When he retired as conference minister and leader of 350 churches in Massachusetts a few years ago, he then became the special advisor on climate justice to the general minister and president of the United Church of Christ. With everything that Jim has done, it is easy to see why we not only invited him to give today's keynote, but we have also named this keynote after him. Each year, the UCC's Earth Day Summit will feature the Jim Antal Keynote Lecture. Jim, we await your prophetic words and inspiration.
Well, let me begin by thanking the co-hosts of this event, the national setting of the United Church of Christ, the UCC's Council of Climate Justice, Mayflower UCC, and the Minnesota Conference of the United Church of Christ. I am so proud of our denomination's decades-long witness on behalf of God's glorious gift of creation. The UCC first sounded its concern for what was then called conservation at the General Synod in 1959. Since then, the United Church of Christ has been a leading religious voice in protecting our common home, in naming environmental racism, and calling out environmental injustice and climate injustice in all of its forms. I'm honored to stand before you today at this inaugural annual Earth Day Summit. This event is a testimony to the decades of work and witness by UCC leaders like Dr. Ben Chavez, like Dollie Burwell, the Reverend Peter Sawtell, the Reverend Megan Pritchard, the Reverend Dr. Brooks Burnt, and the Reverend Michael Malcolm. And thanks to the two of you for hosting this event. It's really been so moving thus far. I also want to thank the countless clergy and congregations committed to restoring God's creation. Now I want to offer you an overview of this presentation. Since the focus of this first UCC Earth Day Summit is stories of hope, I want to begin by asking, what's the story? What's the story we're living in? Then I want to offer an understanding of the kind of hope I believe people of faith are called to embrace, living as we are amidst the sixth great extinction. Finally, I will try to give some shape to the new hope-filled story God is calling us to live into. So what's the story? What's the story we're living in? For the better part of 12,000 years, life on Earth has enjoyed a stable climate. That stable climate allowed humans to stop migrating and settle down, to grow food, to build cities and infrastructure, to institute laws, to claim territories, and to allow for some free time. In other words, the stable climate, or what I like to call the continuity of God's creation, allowed us to create civilization. But that continuity is now broken. Once the industrial era began, it took us only 7 generations to decreate the planet. Over the past 200 years, humanity has extracted and burned about half the coal, oil, and gas that nature took 150 million years to create. That's how the developed countries built the modern world. In doing so, a tiny percentage of us became unimaginably wealthy, profiting from the control over and abuse of the resources they had nothing to do with creating. At the same time, a majority of people worldwide are living amidst increased inequality, poverty, hunger, homelessness, and lack of potable water. These injustices are all casualties of the unjust acquisition, extraction, distribution, and profit from the energy stored under our feet. Let me share some details about the urgency of our peril. For the past 2 summers, regions as far as 70 miles above the Arctic Circle were overcome by daytime highs of over 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, hitting an all-time high above the Arctic Circle of 118 degrees. And a year ago, places in the Antarctic were over 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. We now know that air pollution caused by the burning of fossil fuel kills almost 9 million people every year. That's more than malaria, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis combined. And that doesn't even include the lives lost due to the impact of increased global warming. A 2021 study reports that should global warming exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, the world's tropics, right around the equator there, the world's tropics could become uninhabitable. Many climate scientists believe we will cross that threshold in the next 10 years. Imagine what life will be like with 2.5 billion refugees. In other words, the past decade has been the hottest decade since records have been kept, and the past decade will be the coolest decade your children and grandchildren will ever experience. It's not only heat. Last August, unprecedented monsoons flooded 1/3 of Pakistan, killing over 1,600 people and displacing 30 million others. And between mid-July and mid-August, 5 states here in the US experienced 1 in 1,000 year rain events. Imagine 9 months of rain in a single day. It's not just the deluge, it's also the drought. That's why we call it climate chaos. Europe's drought is the worst it's been in 500 years. According to climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe, who also happens to be an evangelical Christian, over the past year, at least 1 in 3 Americans were personally affected by the way that climate change is making our extreme weather more severe. So, what's been keeping us from taking action? The driving reason is simple. Since their inception, fossil fuel corporations have had one and only one goal: to make the most money for their shareholders each quarter. Consider this. In 1975, when fossil fuel corporations heard that the world was on the brink of global warming, they quickly hired the best climate scientists in the world. As early as 1977, those scientists told the board of Exxon that climate change is caused by humans burning fossil fuel. It's getting worse. And while the oceans are absorbing most of that CO2, that will not continue indefinitely. A new study shows that as far back as 1977, oil companies knew precisely the global warming impacts we now see today. But instead of releasing those reports, Exxon hired the best ocean scientists and asked them if the oceans were in fact saving us. And in the mid-1980s, those ocean scientists confirmed those findings. At about the same time, Exxon's civil engineers reported a breakthrough in the ability to drill horizontally into oil shale, what we today refer to as fracking. So, what did Exxon do? First, they fired those climate scientists and buried their reports. And then Exxon hired a few fake scientists, the same fake scientists that the tobacco industry had hired in the 1970s. Just as these fake scientists had sown the seeds of doubt about whether smoking caused cancer, they began to sow the seeds of doubt about whether climate change was real. Over the past 4.5 decades, fossil fuel corporations and their think tank partners have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on various disinformation campaigns and supporting politicians who will do their bidding. To this day, America remains the only place in the world where climate denial has any political or cultural traction. Thank God that's not all there is to the story we find ourselves in today. Of course, there's the climate movement, and I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But what needs to be said is that since 1965, when President Johnson received the first report on global warming, scientists and engineers have done their jobs. They are providing all the solutions we need to complete the greatest transition humanity has ever attempted, moving from our dependence on fossil fuel to a reliance on renewable and sustainable clean forms of energy. A group of the world's top climate scientists recently issued a report indicating that by 2030, electricity from solar, wind, and water could provide all the electricity the world needs. And by 2035, renewable energy could also be the sole source of energy for all the world's heating, cooling, transportation, and industry. Furthermore, another new study indicates that making this transition will pay for itself in only 6 years. Not only that, but as we make this transition, we can address the economic and racial inequities. And by doing so, we will reap benefits far greater than the costs. Okay, that's the story. Now I want to invite you, as Christians, as people of faith, to receive this story using a familiar frame of reference. Just as Jesus, before he was killed, told his disciples that they would do even greater acts than he, God is calling us to restore God's great gift of creation, to remove the millstones that now hang around the necks of our children and grandchildren, and to hasten a just transformation to a sustainable economy that recognizes the interdependence of all creation. And just as Jesus called his disciples into the upper room, where they would join their hearts together in a final meal, while they confronted their fears and conjured the courage to face unimaginable events that were imminent, and then turn the world upside down. So too, God is calling you and me, our generation, to join our hearts together while we embrace the opportunity to overturn a destructive story of rugged individualism, exploitation, anthropocentrism, racist inequity, colonialist extraction, and environmental degradation. And in its place, create a new understanding of interdependence, resilience, wonder, moral imagination, moderation, justice, and vision. Keeping this frame of reference in mind, I want to offer an understanding of the kind of hope I believe people of faith are called to embrace, living as we are on the hinge of history amidst the sixth great extinction. I believe that truth is the foundation of hope. For hope to be authentic, it must be founded on truth. If we place our hope in something untrue, we eventually realize it's a false hope. To put it another way, facing reality is a precondition of hope. Dr. Jerome Groopman says it well. Hope, unlike optimism, is rooted in unalloyed reality. He continues, to hope under the most extreme circumstances is an act of defiance. Because I believe that hope is the most important contribution people of faith can and must make as humanity confronts the climate crisis. It's critically important for us as people of faith to stare reality in the face. We must be willing to face not only the scientific reality of a rapidly warming world, but also the political reality that there are individuals, groups, and entire industries devoted to spreading misinformation and lies about the climate crisis. If hope is essential to Christians, then exposing lies perpetuated by the powers and principalities that deny climate change must become a first-order priority. Christians cannot stand idly by and allow the greatest moral challenge humanity has ever faced to be framed as an ideological dispute by people with unlimited financial resources acquired by the abuse of God's creation. And so if we are to embrace an authentic hope, there are a few truths every congregation must be aware of. Truth number one, since the Paris Climate Agreement in late 2015, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America have lent over $1 trillion to fossil fuel companies to expand their oil, coal, and gas reserves and build new fossil fuel infrastructure. Truth number two, as I pointed out a moment ago, the world has no need for more fossil fuel. Energy from solar, wind, and water is now cheaper than energy from fossil fuel. Truth number three, if our world is to remain livable, if we are to keep the increase in global temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius, the fossil fuel companies will need to walk away from assets worth approximately $100 trillion. These and other truths must not be hung from the scaffold. They must be proclaimed from thousands of pulpits. Only then can hope take hold. Once we accept that truth is the foundation of hope, it follows, as Greta Thunberg reminds us, that hope starts with honesty. And if we are honest about the climate crisis, we will acknowledge that our hearts are full of grief. Many of us feel dread about what may lie ahead, outrage at what is happening to our planet, and sadness about what already has been lost. Too often, many of us keep these feelings to ourselves while we suffer in isolation. But it turns out that one of the central ministries of the church, the synagogue and the mosque, is to welcome people who are grieving, to hear them out, and to respond to their pain. My years as a pastor and my reading of Scripture have taught me that, in fact, honest expression of grief, the grief we experience, however overwhelming it may feel, is a precondition of hope. Let's make sure that our houses of worship are safe enough places for us to honestly share our grief, and by doing so, give rise to a life of hope and action. Now, before we move on from grief to a life of hope and action, I have one more brief observation to make. It's my experience that the smoke of grief and the fire of love are inseparable. And love fuels hope. I want to encourage you every single day, perhaps multiple times each day, to take a deep breath and allow love to inhabit your heart. Love experienced as gratitude for the beauty, the diversity, the grandeur that surround you. And then allow the fire of that love to cast out fear and propel you into action. We've all heard the expression, keep hope alive. Hope is kept alive by action. In her first public speech, a 2018 TEDx talk in Stockholm, 15-year-old Greta Thunberg, yes, a 15-year-old giving a TED talk, hard to imagine. She said, once we start to act, hope is everywhere. No one imagined, least of all Greta, that over the next 5 years, over 18 million young people from 233 countries would walk out of school into the streets of over 8,000 cities and towns. These young people understand hope as engagement. For them, hope has no connection with optimism. They realize they can't control the menacing juggernaut of the climate crisis. For them, hope is not focused on a future state of affairs. Hope is manifest right now by refusing to be paralyzed by despair, by no longer eating meat, by choosing not to fly, by confronting those in charge. In 2012, the climate movement began to call for divestment from fossil fuel corporations. In 2013, our denomination, the United Church of Christ, led the way in this effort. When the UCC passed a resolution that I wrote, we became the first religious body and the first national organization to vote to divest. No one imagined, least of all Bill McKibben or me, that in only 10 years' time, portfolios worth over $40 trillion would purge their portfolios of their holdings of fossil fuel stocks. In November 2018, 250 young people filled Nancy Pelosi's office, and they refused to leave. Alongside them offering support was then 29-year-old Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Knowing that Pelosi would soon become Speaker of the House, they were demanding that Congress pass some version of the Green New Deal and focus on environmental justice. Although the police arrested 51 of them, Pelosi welcomed the protest and called on the police, and I'm quoting now, to allow them to continue to organize and participate in our democracy. Quite a contrast from current events. In support of their action, in 2019, the UCC General Synod became the first Christian denomination to endorse the Green New Deal. No one imagined, least of all these young climate leaders, that in September 2022, they would be among the honored guests on the lawn of the White House, celebrating the signing of the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes over $370 billion of climate and energy-related projects, by far the biggest commitment our country or any country has ever made to the climate crisis. In 2021, Bill McKibben launched a new climate organization called Third Act. It provides elders, people over 60, in their third act of life, with an opportunity to join millions of others as they realign their time, their energy, their gifts, their attention, and their assets to respond to the call now heard round the world. Bill reminded those elders that they hold about 70% of all the assets in the United States. And then he invited them to tell their banks to stop investing in fossil fuel projects. No one imagined that on March 21st, a month ago, thousands of gray hairs would protest in front of over 100 bank locations to cut up their credit cards and tell the world that altogether, in the last 6 years since the Paris Climate Agreement, the 60 largest banks in the world have poured over $4.6 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. We can't accept God's invitation to help create a new story unless we are willing to take action. Let us become partners with God as we explore new and perhaps unfamiliar pathways, and let our actions be guided by a preferred future that embraces resilience in place of growth, collaboration in place of consumption, wisdom in place of progress, balance in place of addiction, moderation in place of excess, vision in place of convenience, accountability in place of disregard, and self-giving love in place of self-centered fear. God has given us everything we need to cross the abyss between our current story and the new story that God is calling us to champion. Humanity has all the technology we need to immediately transition to a fossil fuel-free economy. But to relinquish our dependence on fossil fuels requires us to expand our moral imagination so that we can extend the horizon of hope to embrace this new story. This may be the most essential work of the church, the synagogue, and the mosque in the climate crisis world. But expanding our moral imagination is not enough. As people of faith, it's time for us to make God's call to restore creation and advance climate justice an essential part of our identity, every much as prayer is an essential part of our identity. The God of many names is calling everyone who is alive today to recognize that our generation, no matter what generation you may be part of, our generation has a vocation, a common universal calling. This is our Easter witness. This is our Pentecost commission. Believing that another more just world is possible, let us become the generation that finally blows the whistle and declares, "Not on my watch." Let us begin to live into a new story, a story that will leave a fair and stable planet for our kids and grandkids and all future generations. A story shaped by the unifying power of shared vulnerability, the emerging embrace of the challenge of change, the humbling reward of justice restored, the expansive fullness of interdependence, the contagious generosity of caring for the least of these among us, and our universal calling to protect God's great gift of creation. Thank you, and let the people say, Amen.
Amen.
Wow, just wow is about all I have to say. Just as a reminder, we are now entering our portion where we have Q&A with the Reverend Jim Antal. If you have questions, if you would, type them in the Q&A box. Our first question is, did you really say that by 2030, wind and solar can provide all the world's energy needs? And if so, what are the actions needed now to reach this goal? And let me put this caveat on that, Rev. If you would speak about the fact that we own land and we could actually lead the charge in a practical way, that'd be great. But I just wanted to jump into that as well.
So I'll pick up, Michael, on your comment about land. So if we actually made the transition, I have my tongue a little bit in my cheek when I say this, but what I am saying is factually accurate. If we actually made the transition and shut down all the oil, coal, and gas refineries and other facilities for oil, coal, and gas, and all we did was cover them with solar panels. If we had that many square feet or square miles of solar panels, we would have enough electricity to power all the power needs of the world. So all we need to do is literally make the transition. Now, of course, that's not going to happen. But the answer to the question that was put into the chat is yes, I said that. And the best science being done by a guy named Mark Z, his middle initial is Z as in zebra, Jacobson out at Stanford. This has been the focus of his life's work for the past 25 years. Not only can every state make that transition, and therefore the United States make the transition, but it's now the case that I think it's 196 countries can also make that transition, the United States being one of them. So yes, it's completely possible. The only thing in the way of that is the staggering figure that I put out there, and that is that the fossil fuel companies now have the legal access to and right to extract $100 trillion of oil, coal, and gas from the ground. And we have to draw the line and say, no, you can't do that. That's what's in the way. Next question.
Jim, thanks so much for that response. And I should preface this next question from our audience by saying this. Long before the national setting through the Council for Climate Justice started its fellowship and internship program, Jim Antal paved the way with his own programs as the Massachusetts Conference Minister, and had some fabulous interns and fellows that continue to have impact. And so, Jim, the question for you is this. If you were to establish and have a student internship right now, what would you recruit a young person to do?
The first thing that comes to my mind is to do intergenerational interactions around climate justice. And what I mean by that is this, that as I said in my talk, older people oversee 70% of the assets in America. And how shall I put this? Sociologic studies have shown that the best way to an older person's heart is their granddaughter. Much more so than their grandson. Go figure, okay? But that's reality, and it's a significant statistical difference between that. So based on that, my first answer to your question, Brooks, is to figure out a way. So in the early parts of the open and affirming movement, when our denomination went through about 5 revisions of how to have the conversation, the touchy conversation in your congregation about becoming an open and affirming church, what we need is some guidance about how younger people can share with older people honestly about their feelings of grief, despair, and so much more. When I first began talking about climate grief, maybe 12, maybe even 15 years ago is when I first began talking about climate grief. Frankly, I was the only voice out there even suggesting that. Well, now you can't go for a day on NPR or read a week's worth of the New York Times without seeing a major article on climate grief, particularly among teenagers. And older people, they don't want to hear it because, frankly, us older people, we know how much we've screwed the planet and how much our generation has benefited from it. And we know the circumstance that we're handing over to our children and grandchildren. We don't want to face it, but we know it. And so to have those intergenerational conversations around that topic is my first and best idea for an answer to that question. Thanks for the question.
Jim, you have been a leader in public action. Considering the fact that what you just said about the fossil fuel industry and the permitting and being able to extract, and looking at even knowing what we need to do, but yet the Willow Project is still being permitted, along with other projects that we're constantly fighting against. And it seems as if though the administration is for. How do we as people of faith move from this place of hope to courage to do just as you've done in the past, to make a public stand against these injustices that we face?
So let me begin my answer. This is a great question, Michael. Let me begin my answer by reminding the audience that the word liturgy means work of the people, right? So I know I'm going to start messing with it with what I am about to say, but here goes. We need to change our liturgies. We need to change our worship experience so that we welcome into worship just as much as we welcome prayer into worship, so that we welcome into worship testimony, a good word with the religion crowd, right? Testimony about what each of us as an individual, as a family, or as some organization has recently done in order to reverse the current pattern of exploitation of the earth. Now, I started harping on this way back long ago, more than a decade ago. And over the past few years, I have heard from numerous congregations across the country that they've actually taken me up on my idea, and at least once a month, and in several cases, once every week, as a standard part of their worship service, they have a 1 minute. This is really hard. Who can talk for 1 minute? Right? This is harder than, God knows what. Anyway, a 1 minute testimony about what their family or their or some organization they're connected with has recently done in order to address the challenge, as you just put it, Michael, against fossil fuel companies. And what happens is, as is the case with testimony of any kind, it causes people in the pews to do this kind of thing, right? And say, we could do that. We could put solar on our roof, we could do that. We could replace our air conditioner with a heat pump and actually become more energy efficient. We could replace our gas boiler with a heat pump and become more energy efficient. Now, those are all kind of personal and individual responses, but the real response to your question, Michael, is that we need to get to the point, and quite quickly, where the Black church was at in the South in the late 50s and 60s. It was almost unimaginable that a Black congregation would not be out in the streets during the week and in church on Sunday. And in order to deprive these companies of that $100 trillion prize, it's going to take people in the streets. That's where your question began, Michael. And I've felt that and known that for decades, and that's why I've been arrested so many times. It's going to take people in the streets saying, the earth is the Lord's. It is not ours to wreck. Thank you, Michael.
Rev, I didn't know you were going to start preaching, but shit, that one got me right there. I almost ran. I had to remember where I was.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. Jim, you have been a part of local actions, state level actions, and nationally coordinated campaigns such as those led by Third Act and 350. Can you say something about where we should be placing our energy today? Is it an all of the above situation? Are there good reasons to focus on one level or another level or each level? Where should we be placing our energy today?
So that's a great question, Brooks, and it would be only a little bit of a cop-out, but it would actually be the truth to say we really need an all-of-the-above strategy. But what I do is I want to put that in the context of vocation. What's really important is for each of us to discern our personal vocation in relation to manifesting our faith in regard to the issue of making the changes science says we must in relation to climate change. And that's gonna look differently for different people. Some people perfectly glad to call their state representative or to call their congressional representative or to call the White House. Other people, that would not be for them. They would rather write a note or a postcard. Other people would rather march in the street at their state capitol. Other people would be part of their local town and attempt to get their town to convert their 40-year-old gas-powered boiler to a geothermal system. And they will engage in hours every week to try to get that passed. It really begins with acknowledging, because we are part of the current generation, that we each of us have a vocation. We have to discern that vocation. And then once we've discerned that, ask what are our gifts and take action on them. That's my response. Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you so much, Jim. And even though we have had a flood of questions come in, we are not able to get to them, unfortunately. And I'd love to spend all day talking to you, Jim, and learning from you. But we must conclude this portion of our summit. Thanks so much, Jim, for your powerful keynote, for your insightful answers to our questions, and for everything you have done to address the climate crisis. What a pleasure it is to now have firmly established the Jim Antal keynote lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Turn on your screens, adjust your volume, and get ready for the second half of the UCC's first ever Earth Day Summit. As part of this summit, we wanted to lift up a stellar example of what a local church can do to care for God's creation. Our co-host, Mayflower UCC, is the perfect example for us, and you will now see this video.
What I have learned is that Mayflower Church has celebrated Earth Day as a high holy day like Christmas and Easter for the last something like 30 years. So children grow up with Earth Day being, again, like Christmas or Easter.
That is gorgeous. Look at this. Outstanding. Wow. Can we take your picture with it? Mm-hmm. Okay, you hold that. This event, it's called Teaching Tables, and it goes with the exhibit about climate change, trying to look at it in a way that has hope for the future. So positive activities, positive language, positive exercises.
Well, I think it's easy to get depressed and get down about the climate crisis. I mean, it's overwhelming, and seeing the pictures of the plastic floating in the oceans and utter destruction of our world can be very depressing. But I come here to Mayflower, and I have a community of people that bring me up.
The response to climate distress is community. That's what we were creating here at Mayflower, a community that will help us deal with climate distress.
We were so hopeful while you're doing the work, whether it's moving towards carbon neutrality or you're going to the Capitol, you're organizing for new laws. When you do the work, you are so hopeful. And our children, we're learning, we know this, our children, our young adults need hope so much in these days, real hope. And so that was a really beautiful thing it was almost palpable, feeling the hope in this community.
Coming to Mayflower, I think the big change was having a community that would talk about climate change as a problem.
When I see Jesus talking about bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, when I see scripture talking about creating a new world, these are the types of things that we strive to be at this church. And I think that it calls for bold action.
Was it 2006 or 2007, I think, was when Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out. And there was a group within Mayflower that was meeting between services called Caring for Creation.
And in 2012, we established a goal of being carbon neutral by 2030. And the solar panels on the roof were the first major step.
It was basically all about climate change, and that we were doing what we could do as a congregation to mitigate climate change and to be a role model, basically, I think is what we were really trying to do. And the church felt, everyone in the congregation felt that was a good idea. And I think we exceeded our fundraising goal on it.
I remember the day that the construction workers were putting solar, we have a solar canopy entrance, which is a way of saying this church is committed to this. And I remember seeing this whole class from our early childhood center, these little kids watching the solar go up, you know, and what a great scene that was.
What inspires me about being here is just the ability and the support to be able to participate in concrete, substantive action that are working towards building a new world as what I would say God is wanting us to build.
The solar panels are kind of the sexy, something we can show, but there were a lot of other things that we did at the church in the HVAC, energy controls, computerized systems, motion detector switches, light switches, all sorts of stuff. And we went through a major audit of what our energy use was and what our spikes of energy were and what the sources were.
We are in the pollinator garden, and one of the benefits is that it gives them a place, a corridor through the Twin Cities from one dwindling habitat to another. It gives them a place to feed, to reproduce, to rest. We have lots of butterflies here. Certainly they're the poster children for the insect world, but we have so many bumblebees and so many teeny tiny little native bees. Basically, if we lose our pollinators, we're going to be living on lentils and grains.
I found my niche in garbage and became sort of the trash lady. A small group of us in 2014 got a grant from the county to become a zero waste site. And you will see when you tour the church that there are containers for composting and recycling bins, and we got this nice grant to get all new containers, to get the liners for them, and to change our trash hauler, which was kind of a big deal because the one we had would not pick up compost.
I see change coming from the grassroots, from a community like Mayflower, where we can be role models for doing things like electrification in our homes, in our cars. We are going to be the leaders, and I think that's where Mayflower is so strong.
But I'm also interested in sort of the broader issues of switching over to different forms of energy that don't cause climate change, and how we can make those changes in practical ways that people can do in their own households. So giving people a way to not just be upset about things that are happening, but take positive steps that make a difference toward change.
We decided to put solar panels up. We had them both for hot water and for PV. We bought into a solar garden to finish out the PV so we could be completely carbon-free there. I started riding the bus.
This is our future that we're fighting for, and I'm just going to fight until I die. That's it. I'm retired now. I have a long time, hopefully, where I can, before I croak. Why not? All ages, all backgrounds, just to go for it, whatever we can do.
I will just keep doing the next thing to try and address the needs that I see, what the earth needs of me. That's my faith, is to try and meet those needs.
We are one, we are strong, we are the
Thank you, Mayflower, for your leadership and an example on so many different fronts. Bob Lormar from the national setting of the UCC shot this video last fall. And I want to welcome back the Reverend Sarah Campbell from Mayflower. Sarah, can you share with us an update on Mayflower and perhaps also share what you all have planned for the road ahead?
Yes, I will do that. But first, I feel very moved to say from this morning that Jim Antal is a prophet of our times, and he's ours. He's the United Church of Christ. He's ours, and he's a prophet. Mayflower's story continues. After we declared our audacious goal to be carbon neutral by 2030, we got to work. We covered our roof with 200 solar panels, insulated, installed LED lights and new HVAC control systems. That was the first stage. Things we learned in that first stage. Don't sing earth hymns with your children year after year if you're not going to put your money where your mouth is. The children are watching to see if you walk the talk or if you live the song. 2, we were never more hopeful than when we were doing the work, raising the money, raising the solar, and then spreading the gospel of solar far and wide. We did not keep our light under a bushel. 3, the first stage was the easiest. The second and third stages are harder, and this is for very good and hopeful reasons, because the technology is changing so rapidly, which is good. It's more complicated determining next steps. But we are called by our faith to be early adopters, take chances, and also there will soon be the additional incentive of the 30% federal grant with the Inflation Reduction Act. Every congregation should learn about that. We are now beginning the second stage. We have a wonderful guide, Peter Dahl, a church guy who's also involved with our scout troop, PhD who consults all over the country and who ignites curiosity about what is possible for church community. He knows our old building, all its holes, and he knows our climate, our Minnesota climate. We will soon begin a capital appeal to fix some broken things like a potholed parking lot, and begin our next stage, stage 2, in our carbon journey to carbon neutrality. This will probably be a well-scaled combination of energy from all the sources we can leverage, from the ground, the air, and the sun. Combination thereof that fits our building and that challenges in a faithful way our financial capacity. If anyone out there knows of big givers looking for test sites that amplify the gospel of the Trinity, solar, heat pumps, geothermal, do let me know. Houses of worship need to be signs of hope and inspiration in these times, and we must exemplify hope for our children. While we raise the money for stage 2 of our green work, we are also considering changing our baptismal vows. Baptism is one of the 2 holy sacraments in the United Church of Christ. We don't take changes to it lightly, but might we add to the promises we make to these babies and their parents, the promises to love them, to raise them on the Jesus path, might we add a new promise, something like this: we love you more than you can ever imagine. And we promise that we will do everything within our power to save this Mother Earth and her waters for you and your children and your children's children. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Mayflower. You all are an inspiration. We now must transition to our all-star lineup of panelists. As someone who works at the grassroots, I love our grassroots organizers. They have some stories of hope that are not often heard, but need to be heard. Their stories show us what's possible when people take action. They give us an example to follow. Brooks, tell us who we have with us today.
Thanks, Michael. I am excited as well by our guests. Let me introduce them to you in the order in which they'll be speaking. First, we'll have Analyah Schlaeger dos Santos from Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Analyah is the environmental justice-oriented youth program coordinator with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Her focus there is on designing and running an ongoing youth program that is structured around youth leadership, advocacy, and environmental justice principles. She also helps to bring youth to the state level to engage with environmental policies such as the Green New Deal. Next, we will have Alexa Horwart. Alexa is the lead organizer for Isaiah, a multi-faith, multiracial, statewide people's organization working to advance racial and economic justice in Minnesota. Alexa has been leading statewide community organizing efforts for a decade, focused on small towns and rural communities. She works often on climate justice and caregiving and the intersections of the two. And then our third speaker for today will be Gina Peltier, who is the project developer for Honor the Earth. Gina is from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and is a leader and organizer who works with and develops new local leaders, facilitates coalitions, and assists in the development of campaigns. Her work has focused on civic engagement, environmental justice, water protection issues, and voter registration. We're delighted to have all of our panelists with us today. Analyah, if you could get us started, that would be terrific.
Yeah, can everyone hear me well enough? Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Analyah Schlaeger dos Santos. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. My family is Afro-Brazilian, Euro-American. I'm born and raised in North Minneapolis, Minnesota, on Dakota and Anishinaabe land. I was raised in the part of our state that has the highest concentration of Black and Brown and low-income folks, and also holds the highest asthma rate in the state. So I come from what's called an environmental justice community, what some call as such, and most of my work focuses on this place. And I'm actually sitting right now in Redeemer Lutheran Church, which is the church I grew up going to. It's the church that I went to all my summer camps with, and I actually have all my youth apprentices are outside, so if you see me look to the side for a second, it's because we are picking up litter right now and planting seeds today for Earth Day. So we've got some kids out here in the cold. It is cold. We had 85 degrees last week, but you know, climate crisis. So I am, thank you, Brooks, for the introduction. In my daytime role, and I guess nighttime and the rest of the days of the week, I hold the role of Environmental Justice Youth Program Director with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, as well as what I will call the International Environmental Justice Presence Team Lead, which is a party of one for right now. But I am blessed and honored to be in these spaces and to be focusing not only on my community that I came from, but as building global community as well, which is an honor. Aside from that, I am the eldest sister. I'm the only daughter. I am on a few boards of organizations that work in a community, and I have 6 youth apprentices as a result of my program called Youth in Power, and I don't always know the right things to say, so glad to be here. So my background is in communications and public relations. When I was a younger person starting out my higher education experience, I was trying to figure out what it would look like, where I'm going to be moving into. I started college at the University of South Carolina thinking I would go into international business and forge mergers between companies, and here I am now many years later, working in community and working with youth. And I actually switched to communications and public relations, and then I left school while shifting to work in the environmental justice movement. So I started to see what I could bring to this movement, hopefully, was my love of the building and developing of genuine relations between people and themselves, and people in their environments and all of the beings under creation, as well as a joy for working with and for young people and with and in service of community. I felt like I was late to the game when I started environmental justice work. I was 23 years old, and a lot of folks in other orgs that I'm with make fun of me for saying that I thought I was late at 23. But I was the oldest person in my program. I joined the movement from communications, the School of Communications and Business School, whereas everyone in my program, my environmental justice program, was pursuing degrees in environmental studies this or political science that. So I was considering adding global studies to my sphere of reference, but this movement met me where I'm at. And so this movement, wherever I joined it, saw me as having an important lived experience that qualified me to be in more places and spaces than I had previously expected as a young person. I think as young folks, we are conditioned to understand that once you earn your stripes, you get to hold a position in power and make decisions. Oops. Only once you've gotten experience. And so I feel like I've landed well because this movement met me where I'm at. So I remember in my early 20s, I just turned 28 2 weeks ago. So I'm getting up there, y'all. I remember when I was younger, starting to hear a lot of folks in my age bracket and younger who were genuinely afraid of the concept of having children. And this decision is not one that I have judgment for, nor do I not myself contemplate the same idea. So I don't bring it up because it's a bad thing. But what concerned me and what, as I was joining this movement, what concerned me was the reality of like what sort of future a young person can look forward to if we're constantly being told that we aren't doing enough, or that we have only a sparse handful of years to completely turn every single thing around in our whole life to get us through. Or we're going to start to see what some are calling the onset of apocalypse. So it's honestly really terrifying when you're in conversation around climate crisis all the time. But a lot of folks question, like, what is there to be hopeful about? And it's a hard question to answer, I'd say. What gives me hope? But there's a lot of things that give me hope, and I'm constantly with other young folks who are, we're having a hard time coming up with things to be hopeful for. But when I think of what gives me hope, I'd say that people give me hope. The earth gives me hope. I think we're often told that the earth is collapsing in on itself because of our actions, but the earth will continue to be here. So the question is, will we be here? And so that's kind of where I live right there is what do we do once all of this, moves to our next phase. Young people give me hope. Tiny little kids give me insane amounts of hope and pure elation and questions that my young adult brain still needs to figure out a way to answer one way or another. I have a 3-year-old nephew, and he is like going to be a future world changer. But my niche is 2 and 3-year-olds, y'all, and I work with high schoolers. So, young people carry me through. I think that things that we can't answer also gives me hope when I think about it. We're experiencing different versions of an era where we have access to the answer for almost anything you could think of. Anything you could think to ask or didn't even think to ask, and then you stumble upon it and you're like, I didn't even know I needed to know that, but this is the era we're in. So if you have access to a phone or the internet, it's always been, we're able to mitigate wonder now by looking up literally anything. But the last few years have really, especially since the pandemic, last few years have really left young folks and the rest of the world feeling as disconnected from everything as ever before. So we are so dedicated to a growth in understanding by any means necessary that we've fallen out of relation to our environment. And for most of us, this is a purposeful and intentional result of racism and fear and systemic harm that have kept us disconnected from our environment. And so now we find ourselves needing to learn how to get back to nature. So a lot of the work that I do focuses on, like I'd said, kids from my community that are intentionally and historically left out of conversations around climate or of being in connection with our environment. And so if we're learning how to get back to nature, that's a massive overhaul that's got to happen. And it calls for a lot of undoing conditioning in your body. So the idea of an ever expanding set of requirements, I'd say, to keep up with changing surroundings gives me hope. We have a we have a capability to adapt as people. Animals adapt, our environment adapts around us, nature adapts around us. And still we keep trying to find ways to one up nature. So, as we're getting back to traditional understandings and we're getting back to the way things should be, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it feels good and it feels right. I think that I've found relative success, I'd say, in keeping what I've heard recently is called a supple mind. And a supple mind is different from an open mind in that it's willing and open to shift its understanding upon the reception of new information. So I would call that another form of adaptation as well. This form of adapting has allowed me to maintain hope in the face of what the IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has essentially informed us time and again is a point of no return. That's just where we're at. So we're at that point, which is why I tend to address all of what's happening around the globe as a climate crisis. It is not just global warming. It's not just, climate change. We're in a crisis right now among all the other crises. So, there's a lot to tackle. But my first job when I was 16 years old was a lifeguard. After a year of doing that, I began teaching and coaching aquatics. I've had the opportunity to work with people in a pool for my job since I was 17. And so in these 11 years, I've had really close personal contact with folks from as young as 6 months old and as old as about 85 plus. And I work on addressing fear that's being held in the body. And fear is constantly playing a tug of war with our mind. And it's an environment, water, that feels like it's attacking you, And so the work that I do, which constantly gives me hope and, uplifts me, and I'm able to put my skills and gifts into it, is working to do away with what we're conditioned to do and what we're programmed to do. And it seems like for all this time, we've been programmed and conditioned to continue harm, even though it's not all of us whose fault it is. So working with folks to, reduce harm and to carry us through from what we're experiencing right now and what we're seeing all around us into this next phase of a new narrative, I'd say that really gives me hope. So, the opportunity to rewrite the narrative, because that's what we're doing every day. We are rewriting what has been decided for us in advance. And we are, doing so not by power, not by might, but by spirit, and community holds that spirit. So I think I'm rambling on and on, but I have lots to say. So I would say that's what gives me hope. And it is an exhausting world that we live in, but the ability to also play and frolic and spend time healing is incredibly hope inducing and hopeful. So I really suggest everyone spend some time with kids. They keep you humble. So humble and hopeful. But I will pass it on to whoever's next.
Thank you, Analyah, and thank you for all that you are doing to help rewrite the narrative. We'll now turn to Alexa.
Fantastic. Thank you, Analyah. Thank you, Reverend Brooks. My name is Alexa Horwart. I am a community organizer, both by profession and vocation, and have been organizing for the past 10 years in Minnesota. I'm also a mom of a 5-year-old who is, my relationship with him is what grounds me and guides me in my work. And I'm the lead organizer for an organization called Isaiah, which is a statewide organization, multiracial, multi-faith vehicle for real people like you and me to change their communities, build a better world. And my work has been focused on rural and small town communities, among other things, but that has been my heart in this work. And this year, this is big celebration. So this year, we, with a very large coalition, across the state of Minnesota, we were able to win on 100% clean, carbon-free requirement by 2040 in the state of Minnesota. So all electricity generated in Minnesota will have to be 100% carbon-free by 2040. So I can feel all like almost 200 of you hopefully celebrating that, maybe clapping a little bit for us. Thank you. It's a very big deal. This policy is among the 5 strongest in the country. I want to say a couple more things about it, but this is not going to be a policy conversation, although I could send you all some resources to look into our bill. So we focused on decarbonizing the electricity sector first, because that's important for decarbonizing other sectors. The bill included a prevailing wage requirement so that livable wages would be paid to people who are doing the work of moving us towards renewable energy. It prioritizes Minnesota jobs and local jobs, and it prioritizes building renewable energy in communities that will be retiring fossil fuel plants. So the worker, justice, local economy angle of our legislation was incredibly strong. This was the first major bill to pass in the Minnesota 2023 legislative session, the first one. Well, second, it was right up there, depending on like dates. And anyways, it was in the top 2, but it was followed by another pretty large set of victories, not all having to do with climate, but I want to tell you about some of them. So following 100% clean energy, we were able to pass voting rights restoration for people who have served their time for a felony will now be able to vote even when they're on probation or parole in Minnesota. 55,000 people will be able to vote because of this work. Historic investments in our public schools and our child cares. We are on the cusp of winning in the next week, automatic voter registration. We will be in Minnesota replacing all lead pipes in the state so that no Flint, Michigan could ever happen in Minnesota. We have passed free school meals for every child in public schools in Minnesota. We will be passing dedicated transit funding to support transit projects over the next decade, and a paid family and medical leave program. If you're not paying attention to Minnesota, I suggest you do. We're in a historic moment. And in many of these victories, people of faith and congregations have been at the center. I want you to take that in for a moment. At the center. Not hiring callers for press conferences, not helpers, not people who show up on occasion. People of faith in Minnesota, for many of the victories I just named, were the architects, the strategists, the power behind the campaigns, and essential for victory. I want you to ask yourself if that is true in your states. So how did we get here? In Minnesota, the 100% clean energy campaign was a 5-year campaign. 5 years to get to the place of being able to win it in the first month of our legislative session. In my organization in Isaiah, in 2017, people of faith in the fall of 2017 engaged over 4,000 people in 500 house meetings, inviting people from their congregations and their neighborhoods into their homes to have deep conversations about the kind of grief we heard about in the keynote of this conference. So people spent time in grief, moved towards hope in these house meetings, pretty deep conversations. Those conversations led to building an agenda that had 100% clean energy at the center of it, among many of the things I just listed. People of faith and congregations decided to engage in elections. There are, of course, limitations and rules to how congregations and people of faith can engage in elections, but limitations and rules do not mean we can't. So we got creative and we built people power through our electoral work. In 2019, with this agenda in hand, we engaged 6,000 people in our legislative session in-person meetings. This was pre-pandemic, remember? And in 2021, we had a 4,000 person meeting on Zoom with the governor of Minnesota. In those 2 years, 2019 and 2021, we passed the 100% clean energy bill in the House in Minnesota. So we got it ready, but it failed to move in the Senate. Behind the scenes of all of these big moments in organizing, we talk about peaks, a 4,000 person meeting with the governor, of which many of you all at Mayflower were at. Hi, Mayflower, and everyone in Minnesota. Those are peaks, but the valleys are just as important in organizing. In the valleys, we built teams. We held retreats. We did listening campaigns of one-on-one conversations about our hopes and dreams. We had congregational forums. We led phone banks. We did canvassing. We did lobbying visits, all people of faith. And during this campaign, there was a lot of pain and a lot of loss. We did not expect that it would take 5 years. Some of us were hopeful that it would move faster. So we, during that time, it was people of faith who kept building, believing that something better was possible, even though it seemed impossible in the moment. And that is what hope looks like in Minnesota. And because of that hope and because of those valleys and because of that building, we were ready in 2023 when it became possible. And that is why it was one of the first two things to pass. So I want to give some advice for people of faith who are doing organizing, which I know all of you on this call fit in that category in some way, shape, or form, or you wouldn't be here. First, I want to name a couple traps that we fall into just as people in doing this work. Traps that stop us from moving forward. The first trap is everything is broken, it's all bad kind of thinking. And I can and we can understand how we get here, right? Nothing will ever change. Things are too broken. This is a trap of despair and cynicism that lets us off the hook from doing anything to make a better world possible. There's another trap on the other side, which is it's all good thinking. Things will sort themselves out. Things will get better. We will be fine. Or another way I've seen this look more lately is I'm doing enough. I'm doing enough to soothe myself that my part is done. Check that box. Doing some work on clean energy, check that box. Instead of asking ourselves, what is actually required of us in this moment? Both of these traps, it's all bad and broken, burn it all down, and it's gonna be fine, alleviate ourselves of being responsible. They let us off the hook. Instead, I believe, as people and as people of faith, we are called to walk the middle between these traps. Clear-eyed, sober understanding of the world as it is and the pain that exists and what we face, married with a deep belief that a better world is possible and an understanding that we bring it about together and we are responsible. So for people of faith, I want to encourage you to do a set of things. I want you to find organizations in your state that you can not only partner with as one of a dozen ministries in your congregation, but that you can co-own. This might not be one organization, it might be a few, but these are not organizations you once a year send a check to and maybe volunteer for. These are organizations like your congregations that you decide to use as your vehicle for public life, that you become members of, that you wield, that you shape. No organization is perfect, neither are your congregations. Decide to own one or two or three. Prioritize building infrastructure that brings lay leaders into leadership, not just clergy. And clergy, don't do public actions without bringing along your lay leaders. Ask yourselves and push yourselves around impact. Are we making the difference we set out to make? If not, how do we? What is our strategy? What is our analysis of the big picture and what we're up against? And then make big asks of the people in your congregations. Don't say no for them, be invitational. So I want to close with my favorite quote about hope, because these are stories of hope. So that's wrapped up advice. Rebecca Solnit, who I think was brought up maybe earlier, says this quote, and this is what I'll close with. Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door, because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of Earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. Hope just means another world might be possible, not promised. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for all those nuggets of wisdom that you just gave to us. That is much appreciated. We'll now turn towards our third and final panelist for today. Gina, we await hearing from you.
Ani na jayan makade mako andudum Anishinaabe and Dunjaba Mikanakwaji and Nidiweg Gina Peltier and Dijnakaj. Hello everyone, how you doing? I'm Black Bear Clan. I'm Anishinaabe with the Turtle Mountain Pemmican Band of Chippewa. My name is Gina Peltier. Thank you all so much for being here today. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen just to show you guys some pictures while I chat, if that is all right.
Your microphone is muted, Gina.
Okay, I'm not sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. For time purposes, there's so much I want to share with you, but I'll just go ahead and keep it short. There is so much uncertainty going on in this world with climate change. In a time with so much despair, there is hope. And I'm going to share with you some of that today. I am with Honor the Earth, and Honor the Earth wants to create awareness and support for Native environmental issues and develop needed financial and political resources for the survival of sustainable Native communities. Honor the Earth develops these resources by using music, the arts, the media, and Indigenous wisdom to ask people to recognize our joint dependency on the earth and to be a voice for those not heard. As a unique national Native initiative, Honor the Earth works to raise public awareness and raise and direct funds to grassroots Native environmental groups. They are the only Native organization that provides both financial support and organizing support to Native environmental initiatives. The model is based on strategic analysis of what is needed to forge change in Indian country, and it is based deep in our communities, histories, and long-term struggles to protect the earth. You know, contrary to popular belief, Indigenous tribes that thrived on Turtle Island for tens of thousands of years weren't nomads that wandered the land. They built habitats that attracted animals. They never needed to use cages. The Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot tribe, did controlled burns on the landscapes. Specifically, they would burn the grass in one area that they wanted the buffalo to populate for the next year. This would be next year's hunting grounds. Hence, why they were called Blackfeet is because of walking on all the burnt soot to cause the soot to stay on their moccasins. So some would say we are a key species. Indigenous tribes cultivate gardens and farm the land without taking any nutrients out of the soil. And today, the nutrients in the topsoil has depleted by 42% in the last 200 years. Scientists say in little over 10 years, if we continue with the industrial farming practices we use, there will be 50% nutrients in our topsoil. So we've witnessed the devastating effects of the construction of Line 3, when Enbridge fracked out toxic drilling fluids into over 22 river crossings and in over more than 200 bodies of fresh water. Line 3 is going through nearly half of North America's fresh water, which is super scary considering that water became a commodity on Wall Street in December of 2020, around the same time Minnesota Governor Walz approved of the permits for Line 3, meaning now people can make money off the scarcity of water. The beginning of June 2021, we could drink the river out of the Mississippi River near the headwaters and not get sick. Then Enbridge drilled under the Mississippi River in the same location and spilled toxic drilling fluid into our fresh water supply, killing our fish after they developed blisters. You can't even put your foot into the river in that area now without developing a rash. It's truly traumatizing to see that unfold in front of your eyes, being able to drink and swim in that river before Enbridge destroyed it. What's even heartbreaking is that we never needed fossil fuels to begin with. Y'all know Henry Ford's first automobiles ran off of hemp fuel, and the whole body was made of hemp steel, which is 1,000 times stronger than the steel we use today. Imagine how many lives we could have saved if we were still allowed to use hemp. And no matter how much hemp you smoke, you can not get high off of it. Unfortunately, the oil barons, the cotton farmers, and the wood producers used racism to make hemp illegal. And you know, all the oil that is flowing through Line 3 is being sold to China so China can make plastics out of it. Anything that's made out of plastic can be made out of hemp. There's so many things that can be made out of hemp. You know, how many potholes did you hit the last time you drove your car? Hempcrete is 1,000 times more durable than the concrete we use today. Imagine if we were allowed to use hemp. There would be less potholes and there certainly wouldn't be as much road construction. So through food sovereignty and energy justice, we are bringing hope with the help of our sister organizations. We're known as Hemp and Heritage Farm, King, Eighth Fire Solar. We have our Nimrod Goat Farm. We grow potatoes. We produce coffee. And then our King, Eighth Fire, Anishinaabe Agricultural Institutes. And as said earlier, you know, ExxonMobil was fully aware of the link between fossil fuel emissions and global heating, but spent decades refuting and publicly attacking climate science and scientists in order to make maximum profit. Fossil fuel companies made trillions of dollars last year, not millions, not billions, but trillions. Well, you have over half of full-time working Americans not even being able to afford a one-bedroom apartment, like myself. Scientists predicted with breathtaking accuracy the disastrous climate path that is wreaking havoc across the globe because of their use of fossil fuels. We are already seeing it today with the tornadoes, the droughts, the wildfires, the floods. They're all becoming even more worse. Global warming is causing the ice caps to melt faster than anticipated. Scientists say we have less than 10 years to make a drastic change. But that's why there is all this talk of hemp. Hemp can clean the air. It's an excellent carbon sequestration. 1 hectare of industrial hemp can absorb 15 tons of CO2 per hectare. Hemp's rapid growth makes it one of the fastest CO2 to biomass conversion tools available, more efficient than agroforestry. Hemp puts nutrients back into the soil. Hemp can help refresh depleted soil by restoring stability and nutrients to the area. Hemp roots grow deep very quickly, holding the soil together and protecting the area from erosion. When the plant is harvested, it also leaves behind large amounts of biomass that can be left to decompose and enrich the soil once again. There are so many uses for hemp. You can make clothes out of hemp, you can make houses out of hemp, you can even fuel your house or fuel your cars and heat your houses out of hemp. You can make so many building materials out of hemp, you can even make paint out of hemp. So we cannot be focusing on the false solutions like carbon sequestration, nuclear, incineration, or hydropower. We need to stop making compromises off the Indigenous and BIPOC life. lives. That 100% bill is not 100%, and it is sacrificing Indigenous and BIPOC people. We need to do the Green New Revolution right. So we also spread hope by being a leader in true clean energy, not only by educating people on hemp, we also have other endeavors such as producing solar energy and promoting food sovereignty. By producing food, you lose some of the need to purchase, which reduces the instability of your dollar in a time of climate change and rising oil prices. A small garden plot might put up $1,000 worth of food. If we moved from industrial agriculture to localized organic agriculture, we could sequester about 1/4 of the carbon moving into the air, which is part of destroying our glaciers, oceans, forests, and lands. And I don't know about y'all, but I love gardening. I just don't have the time for it because I'm working so much, because even working 40 hours a week doesn't pay all my bills. But it's important for us to continue to take a stand and to work with and educate our communities of how they can help. That's why we work hard, and we also hold a lot of events. We had the Water is Life celebration this last September, where we had multiple artists come and perform, and it brought thousands of people together, and we were able to spread the good news and education on how important water is and what people can do to help protect that. We have Shell River reunions, which is focused on healing, because protecting the environment and being a water protector, you automatically have a target on your back, and that is quite traumatizing, the work you do. So we do like to hold events that focus around healing and faith and all that good stuff. We have Indigenous farming conferences and hemp conferences. And then this summer, we have the gathering at the Mississippi Headwaters, this June 2nd to the 4th, which is co-hosted by Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light and Rise Coalition. You know, people of faith and conscience are coming together to affirm Indigenous sovereignty and nurture connections with our land, water, and all living creatures, and learn about the real change being created through legislation and policies, and other ways you can honor and respect one another and the earth. And you know, I want to share this with y'all because before 2020, it may be surprising to you, but I really hated everyone. I was in a really bad place. I had a really awful upbringing full of abuse and all that stuff. And the community I was raised in was very harsh. But when Standing Rock happened and I saw my sisters unarmed, nonviolent, fighting for everyone's water and being attacked by men 3 times their size and dogs who didn't care if they bit them and drew blood. I saw my sisters unarmed, nonviolent in fields protecting the water being attacked. And I knew that I could not just sit on my couch any longer and ignore what's happening around me. So ever since then, I took every chance and every opportunity I could to take a stand for Mother Earth and our community. And through that, I have found amazing people that have brought me to the place I am today. A few years ago, you wouldn't have seen me talking in front of anyone about anything. I was happy and content being by myself in my home. But joining this community of water protectors, I have seen so much love and support, and I've seen that the fact that we are capable of doing so much better, and we are capable of working as a community for the betterment of everyone. So we really do need less individualization and more community. And when we come together and work as a community, we can thrive as Mother Earth intended, and we can sustain our society for future generations. We are capable of doing better, and a great future is possible. And one more thing I just want to add before I let you all go is that I even talked to the people who changed my oil about all this. I give them all the facts and all the information, and I let them know, like, you know, you're worth more than what you're getting paid, but at the same time, you know, we never needed to use oil, and that they don't need to feel bad for it. They just need to educate themselves and work better towards a better future, and let people know that there are better resources out there. You guys, I could go on all day long. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop there. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you everyone for caring about Mother Earth.
Wow. This has been an amazing panel. And let me say on a personal level, Gina and Analyah, it's good to see you all again. So this has been powerful. And as we bring this to a close, I want to thank you all so much for your wisdom that you brought and your experience, and that you are making a difference. Each of you is truly a scope or a source, of hope. Now, Brooks, how do we wrap up this incredible summit?
Hey, thank you, Michael. I do think we've got maybe some time here for one or two questions for our panelists. So we'll take an opportunity now for questions from the audience and questions that are brought before us. All three of you are skilled organizers. So a question is, what are some core skills of being an organizer? Is it something that requires training, or can anyone do it? Tell us what it means to be an organizer and what it entails. Alexa, would you like to take the first stab at that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think of community organizing as a craft that you apprentice yourself to with other people and can learn. And the heart of organizing is building relationships. So deep relationship building is something, again, that can be taught, that you can go through training around. And then understanding power is key to organizing. Understanding how you build people power, how you engage in an analysis around how power is moving in your landscape. Again, all of which I would encourage you all to seek out organizing trainings and opportunities to learn and build organizing skills and tools together. Every single person has the capacity to be an organizer. I'm an introvert. Some people think extroverts have to be, or you have to be an extrovert. It's not true. But yes, seek out ways to learn from people in your states, in your communities.
I can piggyback on that. So yeah, I would say that learning and being in a good space where you can actually start to understand the things that are affecting your community is how anyone can become a community organizer. I think that a lot of us adults that are making programming for young people operate from an assumption that everyone wants to be a leader. And something that I got at this youth conference that we were at for Power Shift 2 weeks ago was that not everyone needs to be a leader. We actually need some people to be followers. And that was the first time I'd heard that. But, if we operate from the understanding that everyone just inherently wants to, be the change, I think that is a little bit of an assumptive and it's an assumptive thing that we do. So I think starting to pay attention to what's happening to your community is a way that you can start to match your talents with organizing said community. I did not think of myself as an activist growing up until I started doing this work. So, how do we hold space for folks that didn't see themselves as an activist or don't see themselves as a change maker, but that have a very important set of lived experiences that qualify them to be in this space. So yeah, I'd say learning what's happening in your community at present gives way to opportunity to address those things and to start righting some harms caused. But I think that everyone that is a part of community has an opportunity to become a community organizer. And we also just have this massive crisis happening right now. We have many, like I'd said, overlapping multitudes of crises. So there's some way to get involved in some regard. So whether it's a small thing or a big thing to you, I think just relations is at the forefront of everything. So really building relationships with folks helps as well.
Knowing that you all are speaking with communities of faith and people who are overseeing or pastoring communities of faith, where and how do we get started?
You show up. um, you take it upon yourself to show up, seek out what's going on out there, see what's going on in your community. And if no one's doing anything, then you can just start organizing yourself. We all have different abilities, and they are all valued in the movement, whether it is being a keyboard warrior or taking that arrest. They're all important. I think the most important thing that I see in organizing is providing food. And then that too, when the Line 3 resistance started, a lot of people didn't know about it. So a lot of people took it upon themselves to start their own rallies. I know a lot of people did Salsa Tuesdays, where they danced in front of an Enbridge building and they provided food. Another group danced every Friday in front of a Wells Fargo building with their signs. And it's not just, organizing rallies. Like I said, just show up and get involved. Showing up to this webinar is organizing and starting. You get to see who's out there working and stuff like that. And so I always say, just show up, and if no one's doing anything, start doing yourself. I was part of a group who danced in front of Wells Fargo, and it started with 3 of us, and it turned out at the end there was over 40 of us showing up, which was quite interesting. And then you get to share with people what's going on. People come up to you and they ask, and you just nice and politely start that conversation with them and share all of the facts and education. Being on the front lines and in the frontline resistance camps, we were very open to talking to pipeliners. That a lot of them didn't know exactly the harm they were causing, and they didn't know that there were other jobs out there. So a lot of the leaders were able to turn the pipeliners over to being a water protector, and some of them quit their jobs. But yeah, just show up, and if no one is doing anything, take the initiative yourself. We all have skills that are very valuable.
Thank you so much, Gina, for that. To pivot here to, I guess, for Alexa or Analyah, question. Both of you work for organizations that are kind of rooted in local faith communities. If you could share something about, experiences you've had where you've seen faith communities kind of step up and you've just really appreciated the ways in which they've done something or taken the initiative on something or decided to be a follower on something, what are some things that are really helpful that you've seen kind of coming from faith communities and that you'd love to see more of? Are there some words that you can put to that?
Okay, sure, I can go first. So like I said, all these pretty incredible victories that we have either achieved or are on the cusp of achieving in Minnesota, not all, but many have been led by faith communities. And I think that's, again, because of decades of organizing in congregations. And what I would say is, again, talking about this valley work, what happens between peak moments is really key. So when faith communities only do peak moments, I would call that mobilization. Mobilization has its place, but how we till the soil, how we go deeper, the work of building teams, social justice teams, climate teams in our congregations is critical. And do those teams not just do book studies, which are fine and great and help us grow and learn, but also have an analysis, have a strategy, connect to powerful organizations in your state, in your county, in your city, and then decide to be responsible for impact, for passing the policy at your county, for changing that rule in your city. That is when I see faith communities really shine, and engaging your entire congregation in that conversation and in that process. Again, instead of, I think showing up is absolutely right. And to Gina's point, that is your first step. And then decide to be responsible. When you show up, sign up. join the team, right? And take those next steps.
I can just add really quick. So at MNIPL, we have what's called a theory of change. We have a theory of change that will, oh y'all, it has been a long morning. We have a theory of change that is called the three-legged stool. And so in order to see, deep transformational shifts happening, you cannot have just one leg of the stool. So the three legs of the stool are a practical change, a relational or spiritual change, and a systemic changes. And so I think that faith communities, tend to focus on the relational and spiritual aspect. And now we're in this climate crisis, so folks are able to, do something about the practical aspect of like reducing our carbon footprint and reducing our emissions. But we also have this obligation and opportunity. Sorry, there's lots of young folks moving around me. We have this kind of opportunity an obligation to also address possible systemic changes. And so I've been working in the international reparations conversation around loss and damage for the last 6 months. And we were able to get faith communities to get behind pushing our State Department and our Congress to not block progress on loss and damage. And just super, super quick, if you haven't heard of it, loss and damage is essentially looking at countries that have contributed the most to the climate crisis, starting to accept our fair share of what we've contributed to the climate crisis, because communities globally that have contributed the least are bearing the brunt of the worst aspects and the worst parts of the climate crisis. So I think faith communities have an opportunity to pressure our representatives and our people in power that have had a hand in getting us to this point, and expecting to see some change. We need to expect that, the people that we've elected are going to do something to stop harming our communities. So to get people that have power and have wealth to put their money where their mouth is and affect some relational, systemic, and practical change. I think faith communities have an opportunity to do that. So we were able to get a congressional letter penned and signed by Representative Ilhan Omar to go to our State Department and influence a huge win at the United Nations conference, COP27, to stop blocking progress on loss and damage. So when faith communities do actually get behind practical change as well, as relational and systemic, and systemic change, we have an opportunity to really get some cool things done.
Great. Thank you so much for those concluding comments. We do have to bring this to an end. I'm afraid this has been terrifically informative and enriching. Thank you so much to each of you. Gina, Alexa, and Analyah, you have been terrific, and your stories and insights have been awesome. We are now going to wrap this summit up in the best way possible, and that is with a call to action. We're not just kind of give abstract exhortations here from the pulpit. We have actually got a lead organizer for a campaign with us today. Andy Wells Bean, we've got all this positive energy to do something now after hearing from these incredible speakers. Can you tell us where we can channel this energy?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brooks, and good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad to be here with you all today. Thank you to everyone who stuck it out to the very end of this fantastic event. My name is Andy Wells Bean, and I currently serve with the National UCC Environmental Justice Ministries. So as we know, our planet, its creatures, and its people are in some serious trouble, but we must look for hope. So this past year, nearly 1,000 UCC youth from across the country drew, painted, and colored their thoughts about environmental justice and protecting creation as part of the Climate Hope Cards art contest. Now, their art embodied so many times the heartbreak of watching a suffering planet and embodied deep hope for a better future. So it is now up to us to pick up where they left off. We have a unique opportunity over the next year or so. The EPA is considering 10 rules regulating pollution. So I'm talking about asthma-causing soot and particulate, climate change-inducing greenhouse gas pollution, as well as dangerous mercury, coal ash, effluent wastewater. If all of these EPA rules are updated to a really strong new standard, we could save thousands of lives and improve conditions for threatened wildlife. So the EPA, as I'm sure you can imagine, is definitely hearing from big industries that want to keep polluting as usual. They need to hear from people of faith who care about creation. That is why we're launching the Climate Hope Cards postcard petition campaign. Your congregation is needed to help us collect tens of thousands of postcards across the country. I hope that you will join us for the postcard campaign launch call next Saturday at 3 p.m. Be sure to register for the kickoff call Zoom if you haven't already, and register your congregation to receive a toolkit and pre-printed postcards. See you on the 29th. Bye.
Thank you so much, Andy. I see you've got your Climate Hope mug, and so do I. This is the winning artwork, and you can order that through UCC resources. What a great way to end this summit. We will have a post-summit email with information and links about the Climate Hope Cards campaign and resources that have been referenced in this summit today. I also want to share with our audience that you are invited by Mayflower UCC to join them later in the day for a Reader's Theater presentation entitled Stories of Hope from the Front Lines. From 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. Central Time, one can watch via a YouTube link that we will share in the chat. And now a big thank you to everyone who made this summit possible. Thank you, Mayflower. Thank you, Minnesota Conference. Thank you, Council for Climate Justice. May the hope of God be with everyone as we leave here today. May it embolden and empower you. May it lift you up in this movement for justice as it rises and sweeps across the land. Take care, everyone, and God bless you.